Hi everyone, my name is Sean Duong Allingham and I'll be introducing today's session. I'm part of the Australasian Chapter Leadership and Organising Committee. I would like to welcome you to the sixth of the webinars on standards, this one focusing on ISO 22336 Guidelines for Resilience Policy and Strategy. This was meant to be the last webinar in this series. However, as you may know, there will be one more, which will be an open forum where you will have the opportunity to reflect on the prior 6 webinars. This will be held on Thursday, the 18th of September at this time. I hope that you will find this webinar insightful and helpful. Acknowledgement of country. The BCI in Australasia would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. I acknowledge that the land I'm sitting on belongs to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We as an Australasian chapter are committed to honouring Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, waters and seas and their rich contribution to society. Just a safety briefing, wherever you are joining us from today, we ask that you please make yourself aware of the nearest fire exit and please follow the directions of fire wardens in the event of an emergency. As you would likely know, we, the Australasian chapter, have been running a series of webinars introducing and covering various aspects of standards. These webinars are not intended by any means to try to teach you everything there is to know about the standards or how they relate to the GPG 7.0. Most importantly, the webinars are not intended to replace formal BCI training by the licensed training partners. These webinars are to help practitioners to learn practical tips from other practitioners by having a discussion about what has worked for them and to share tips and tricks. We encourage you to have a look at the formal training on offer in your region. Please have a look at the certification and training section of the BCI website. Just some housekeeping for today. We ask that unless you are making a comment, please keep your microphone muted. If you can, please keep your camera on. However, we understand if you can't. We do understand that the BCI has changed the format of these webinars as of this one, and this is now a webinar as opposed to a normal Zoom meeting. So you might see 2 tabs at the top, one called webinar and one called Saul Midler's screen. So if you can't see the screen sharing, you likely need to click on Saul Midler's screen. Hopefully you are able to ask questions and make comments in the Q&A or the chat as we go. And if requested, please unmute yourself to ask your question or to make a comment, and you can request to unmute yourself as well. All right, just introductions. I'd now like to introduce or reintroduce you to Saul and Wasim, who will be facilitating today's session. Saul is a seasoned and very highly regarded business continuity and resilience expert with over 30 years in the industry. He's been a member of the BCI since the mid-90s, is a fellow and honorary fellow of the BCI, and is currently working as Senior Manager, Business Resilience at AGL. He's been recognised with many awards in our industry. He represents the BCI in Australia on the Standards Australia Technical Committee MB025 and serves on numerous ISO technical committees. Saul has contributed to and co-authored many of the Resilience family of standards. Wasim has over 25 years of experience in the resilience industry. He was recognised with FBCI status in 2022. He's the CEO and founder of Risk Professionals, consulting in business continuity management, cyber resilience and artificial intelligence. He's worked previously for major banks and consulting companies and implemented GCR and business continuity programs, successfully adopting PAS 56, BS 25999 and ISO 22301. Wasim has also won multiple awards and he previously served as a director on the BCI Global Board. As always, it gives me great pleasure to now hand you over to Saul and Wasim, and thank you both.
Sean, thank you very much, and welcome to everyone who's joined us in today. And a big thank you to those who are joining us in a very strange hour. I had looked to see where many people were coming in from, and we've got basically people from every continent except North America and Antarctica, and I'll forgive Antarctica. So here's the journey that we've taken today. Hopefully many of you have been on this journey with us to get some insights on how standards think. But today we're going to leave the core BC standards and step into the resilience space. And for those not aware, please note that we've added another session. Sean mentioned this at the beginning, but I popped it on this slide here just so you can write down the date, and no doubt there'll be comms going out about that. And the reason for this session is just there's a lot to cover in the standard, and unfortunately I don't necessarily leave enough time for questions and answers. So this gives us an opportunity for people to gather up their questions over our journey and provide an opportunity, maybe a forum, to talk through some of the aspects of the standards that we did present. So Wasim and I hope that you can join us on the 18th and have a discussion around what you're thinking about in terms of standards and how it relates to your work. But today, we are going to focus on ISO 22336. The standard itself is about 20 pages. It provides a resilience policy and strategy framework for how organizations can better anticipate and respond to change, including acute shock and long-term stresses that will enable them to deliver their business objectives and to survive and prosper. And they're really the key philosophical elements of what resilience is. Now, 22336, this standard, actually builds on 22316. And for those who have joined us for the first time, there's a lot of numbers that I tend to throw around, so I apologize. Now, 22316 is organization resilience principles and attributes. And so there's a tight relationship about that. But I need to highlight to everybody an important aspect about these standards. So management system standards like 22301, BCMS, and the standards that we've covered on the journey, so far, promote a uniform approach across all organizations. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you're a big organization, a small one, it doesn't matter what market sector you're in, it doesn't matter about, who you are as a business. The BCMS says you have to do a BIA. And when you do the BIA, everyone gets a list of their activities and products and services with RTOs tagged to it, right? So that's what we mean by a uniform approach. Everybody does the same thing and understands what the output is. However, 22316 and this standard, 22336, does not promote a uniform approach across all organizations. Why? Because each organization has different objectives and different initiatives, and they must be tailored to suit their organizational needs and their context. And context is really important. And I like what the technical committee has done in terms of this standard and highlighting or promoting the constructive context. And we will talk about that in a few minutes. So in addition to making that linkage between 22316 and 336, there's also a very strong flavor that 336 encourages proactive risk awareness and strategic alignment. So two really important spheres of influence around resilience.
So Saul, if you don't mind, a couple of questions here now. I mean, one thing, do you think that we really need this standard? And then especially now, since you said it's built on 22316, can we use it for 22301 as well?
31. Okay, let me answer the first part of the question. Do we need this standard? I absolutely believe we need this standard. So why? So 22316 is all about principles and attributes. And the document itself presents 7 principles and 9 attributes, all very meaningful. All very meaningful. But it doesn't tell you how to implement that in your organization. And that's where this standard fits into the scheme of things. So from that perspective, I think organizations need to understand how to structure up, define a strategy, write a policy, define a strategy, and implement that strategy on how they can become more resilient. So from that perspective, absolutely yes. And I think the other dynamic around that is that, and we see it all the time, we see it in the news, right? Organizations continue to be faced with change. And in my opinion, most of that change is undesirable and far broader than just disruption. And so again, another reason which promotes the need for being more resilient. And again, this document will help you understand how to program a program of work to ultimately improve your resilience. What was your other question? 22301. Good question. I've never thought about it until now, but I'd say why not, right? Why not use 22336 in other management domains, especially BC, right? I think that there's a component of this standard which everyone will see soon called enabling behaviours. And I think if you were to take those enabling behaviours and apply them in other disciplines like BC, then yeah, it would absolutely be beneficial for the organisation. It would contribute to a better BCMS.
All right.
So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. All right, so moving into the document, clause 4 is a focus on principles. And you can see that there are 3 key principles that the standard talks about. And this is based on what they call figure 2. It's a diagram in the standard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal or build this diagram over the next few slides to better help explain the relationship between these 3 key principles as you see them here, and attributes and enabling behaviours that you'll see in the next few slides. And so if we just focus on these 3 for a moment, it's a very simple message here that within policy formulation, the principle here is that you need to align your policy with your organization's value, its vision, its culture, and culture is really important. I'll probably touch upon culture a few times as we go through today's session. Strategy design is about considering the governance structure, the diversity of competencies that you need spread across the enterprise. How will you share knowledge? How will the leadership, your top management, drive resilience in your organization? So that's thinking about the strategy on how to do that. And the third pillar here, strategy implementation, is in some ways the execution. It considers how the organization can actually anticipate, identify, absorb and manage change, right, as well as coordinate and align its various systems. And those systems mean both management systems and IT systems that support those management systems. So one of the key drivers here, and as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the attribute or the aspect of context, it's really, from my perspective, it's really important that policy and strategy are contextual to each organization in the world that it operates in. And I think most people don't think deeply enough about this. They don't really think broader than what's happening within their own organization and maybe their customers. But there's a far bigger picture here that needs to be taken into consideration. And Clause 5 provides a clear explanation on how to think about the organization's context. So I'll read this out. This is the narrative, right, in Clause 5. I've just paraphrased it here. Organizations are part of a bigger world that includes social, economic, and I'll call it IT systems. And these systems can have can behave in unexpected ways and affect how well an organization can cope with change. And changes in the world around an organization can bring risk and new opportunities. And again, I like that element too, because it highlights it's not always about bad things. You can turn change into something better than what you might otherwise have realized. It's important to regularly look at what's happening inside and outside the organization to spot early signs of change. And yes, this sounds like horizon scanning, but I think we also need to consider the potential change closer than the horizon, if that makes sense, as well as change within the organization. And the last point that I've pulled out of Clause 5 is understanding these changes help leaders make better decisions to keep the organization strong and adaptable. So understanding the context of your organization is, I'd say, critically important to the success of implementing a resilient strategy. And I think part of the challenge there is to look for sources that describe your context, which we'll talk about soon as well. All right, so coming back to the where's my mouse? Right, coming back to the diagram now, back to figure 2. We'll just look at each of these pillars one at a time. The next layer below policy is this layer of attributes. So what are the attributes of a resilient organization? So policy formulation is about aligning the resilience policy, with your shared vision, your purpose, your organizational values, your culture. And the policy should do the following 3 things, right? It should describe internal and external context and their influence on resilience. Promote a culture that supports resilience across all levels of the organization, and it requires top management commitment and accountability. And more importantly, from my experience, it requires execution, right? Talk about that in a moment too. And there's a relationship here between the philosophical ideas in this space. There's a relationship with that and our Good Practice Guide 7.0 in PP2, which talks about embracing BC. And again, I'll talk about that in the next slide or so. So that's the policy formulation pillar. The next pillar is strategy design. And strategy design thinking is about determining or designing or documenting how your organization is going to do the following things. How is your organization going to anticipate, absorb, manage change effectively, and how they're going to do that through your management systems, be they IT systems or management processes. How will you integrate various management disciplines like business continuity, like risk, like cyber, like crisis management? Well, I've only just rattled off 4, but there's many, many more. And if you want some insights to the way the standards think about that, I'll draw your attention back to 22316, principles and attributes. That document has Annex A, and in Annex A, there is a list of 17 relevant management disciplines. It's not presented as the entire list, but it's giving you a really solid starting point to think about the different types of management processes that happen within an organization. All right, strategic thinking should also be about, how do you promote the sharing of information and the sharing of knowledge? So and they're 2 very different things. Sometimes you have to pull knowledge out of people's heads, whereas information can be sourced through technology and other sources. But it's about sharing the information to empower people, right, and to remove team silos, which is a challenge. And the third element here, the third dynamic under strategy design, is that you need to design or decide or work out how you're going to embed continual improvement through evaluation and response performance criteria. It's about designing KPIs that you can then leverage from year to year on how your resilience program is performing and to what extent you feel that you are improving or enhancing your resilience. And in terms of metrics, it's hard to really go into metrics because, as I said before, they're contextual to your organization and your context and your strategy. But simple things, like how often do your teams meet, semi-formally, right? So as an example, I head up business resilience at AGL. I've got some buddies in the risk management team. We will meet every 2 weeks, right? Nothing formal. Sometimes it's over a coffee or a tea. I will give them a sense of what I've been doing over the last 2 weeks and what I've found, what I've discovered, and they will do the same. And I would say more often than not, so maybe more than 50% of the time, one of us has an aha moment, right? Where we learn something new just through that conversation, right? So these are the sort of things that this standard is talking about, right? How to change the way you think, setting up criteria, maybe setting up KPIs. Not that we have a KPI that we must meet every 2 weeks, but if you wanted to, that could be a KPI, right, against my role, right, that I'm meant to meet, other leaders in different management disciplines across the organization to share, right, to share information, to share knowledge. All right, let's look at the third pillar, which is strategy implementation. So the output of strategy implementation, well, these 3 things, but effectively to drill in, well, you need adequate resources with a diverse set of skills and knowledge and experience assigned across the business that are routinely reviewed for effectiveness. And maybe in the example I just provided a moment ago, right? So I specialize in business continuity and crisis management. The risk guys specialize in that. And so we all have specialists across the organization. We need to make sure that we don't have any holes, right? That we're not making someone who's not a specialist or with the appropriate level of expertise take on something that they possibly shouldn't. Second point. All right. So the output of strategy implementation, right? Yeah. So empowered leadership, and leadership roles across the organization. Again, making sure that this is kind of like beyond just their, position description stuff. When we empower a leader, we empower them to make decisions, right? To understand, to listen, to share and make decisions. That's the philosophy around this one. And the third element here is coordinated and aligned systems that eliminate silos and foster collaboration. And again, this comes back to those 17 management disciplines in 22316 in Annex A. And just while I'm talking about that, I'm just going to reach across and have a look at, I've got a little printout here just to give you a sense of what 316 talks about. in terms of those management disciplines. There's the obvious ones, which I rattled off before, which is, BC crisis, risk management. But some of the other ones, which you may not have thought about, bringing into the conversation, the resilience conversation, is asset management, environmental management, facilities management. And facilities management. I have a conversation with facilities management once a month as well, just to hear what's changing in our physical environment, our security environment. Fraud control, governance, health and safety. For us at AGL, we generate electricity. For those of you outside Australia and New Zealand, we have a very, very strong health and safety culture. So there's really important resilient elements in there. Human resource management, IT, obviously, physical security, quality management, supply chain management, and just general strategic management. So these are a representative list, right, found in 22.316 to say, if you're thinking about resilience, think about how you might get these, various management disciplines to work closer together. So that's the attribute layer. I'm now just going to reveal the third layer in the diagram, which is then fleshed out in more detail in clause 7, which is enabling behaviours. And the best way to think about that, and for me, this is kind of like the engine room for resilience. Policy and strategy are useless unless the organization's behaviours are appropriate. Conceptually, this is really well described in GPG 7 PP2, which talks about embracing business continuity. It used to be, if you cast your mind back before GPG 7, the previous version, the 2018, was embedding BC. We changed it to embracing, but for I think this reason, right, for the resilience thinking reason. And what PP2 talks about, it says, look at your culture. Recognize that just because you tell somebody to do something doesn't mean you're going to get a quality result out of it. What you want to do is you want to move people's thinking, right? You want to move like their BC or their resilience thinking from something that's kind of like academic in their head, or by direction, you will do a BIA, so moving it from head to heart, right? To thinking about how you feel about something, that you feel the need to do this. You feel that the only way that we can improve our resilience is by doing this, not because somebody's told you, and not necessarily because there's a policy. You need a policy, but the whole idea of PP2 is about getting a change in behavior out of the people within the organization. And so in other words, in terms of what we're talking about here for 22.336, policy and strategy are useless, cannot be implemented effectively unless the organization feels the need to be, right? Check out the behaviors, right? The need to be adaptable, right? We want people to feel that it's okay, to accept and embrace change, right? We need to be adaptable. We need to be inclusive. We need to be integrated, right? We need to be reflective. We need to be prepared. We need to be robust. We need to be innovative, right? And so these enabling behaviors absolutely contribute to us being a more robust and more resilient, organization. And I might actually throw a question back to Wasim about this, because I know about the type of work that you do in your consultancy. I've got a question for you, Wasim, if you don't mind.
Yes,
so given the inclusion of these behaviors in this standard, right, how can organizations embed ESG and EDI principles into their resilience strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Saul. This is one of my favorite questions, by the way, because I've been working on this one beside resilience and continuity on the ESG, because what I believe is when we see the holistic resilience landscape, then ESG plays an integral role. But how we can embed, that's your question, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's same typical approach from top to bottom. So I think what we need to establish is, like, if you already have a steering committee or a governance board for business continuity or a crisis management, so as part of their charter, we need to embed this thing and accountability for this implementation into their charter. So they are the one responsible not only for the implementation, but also to define the rules and the responsibilities at every level of the organization. They need to ensure that as part of the awareness, be it part of the new employee induction or an annual refresher, these elements are there. they need to establish KPIs at their level and at the other level as well. So again, the policies they need to establish. So, and again, policy need to be acknowledged by everyone. So I think these are those very standard one, but then we tend to ignore these things now. So I think what we need to see, getting out of that orthodox approach, we need to embed this one now. And now lately, my favorite thing is from resilience perspective is AI. We need to embed the AI into it now. So now this is what I will be talking about in all my webinars or the seminars now, because, and that's where I see a very natural integration of ISO 42001, into these standards now. So maybe we'll conduct a few more webinars on ISO 42001 in future together. But that's how I see it. So we need to see the holistic picture rather than just, looking in silos.
No, Wasim, thank you. I totally understand what you say. And I think the element of KPIs is also important. And we'll talk about KPIs as well, right? We need to be able to measure what we're doing. So thank you for that, for those insights. So with a bit of a detailed focus now on those.
And Saul, if you don't mind, there is a question for a long time now. Maybe it's good to ask you now if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay.
So the question was from Benson that will there be an integration approach? Can we integrate like 22301, 22361, and 22316? Or again, if I would add that, whether we can integrate or whether they complement each other, if you can just, throw some light on this.
I think they certainly complement each other, and as some of you may recall from our very first presentation, I think it was last November or December, when we talked about the landscape of standards, these standards are required to be reviewed or refreshed every 5 years. And so I think as time marches on and more standards in the resilience space get created and our ideas, change and, we learn more over time, the standard will continue to change. So at the moment, I kind of see them supporting each other. I'm not sure if it's in an integrated fashion or a complementary fashion, but they certainly support each other. And I think we just need to see, I think there's 2 other standards that are currently under development at the moment. We'll see how they come out and where they fit in the scheme of things. As much as I'd like to spend more time in the resilience standard space within ISO, I just don't have the capacity. I tend to focus more on the BC side. All I can say to you, Benson, is to maybe watch this space over the next year or so and see what comes out.
Thanks, Saul.
All right, so let's talk about clause 7. So in my opinion, as I mentioned a moment ago, the enabling behaviours is key to a successful implementation because change must be implemented through top management. It's your executive leadership team that must lead by example through their enthusiasm and their energy. They need to operate an organisation where, as leaders, they say, I want you to do as I do and not do as I say. And I think for me, that is the most challenging part, right, of trying to implement, programs of work around resilience. And I say that because as a consultant and now as a permanent employee, there are some things you can do as a line manager, right? You can run a BC program of work as an example. You can run workshops. You can influence people as you go along. But resilience has to work at top level, top management level. And so you really need them to be active. You need them to be working, proactively on the strategy and understanding what implementation takes. And to get access to top management, to your executive leadership team, can be very, very challenging. But these are the behaviours, the enabling behaviours that 22336 presents. And again, I've just paraphrased these into 3 dots. Each of these sections in the standard is fleshed out with a lot more depth there. But in terms of the area of adaptability, we want staff, we want our people, right? We want them to need to feel, it sounds cumbersome the way I'm saying this, right? We want them to accept, right, that, uncertainty is a reality of the world we live in. And that, and that over time we're going to evolve in response to the change. So that, that's the key messaging here around adaptability, right? Designs flexibility into the system for rapid decision-making, applies existing resources to new purposes efficiently. But the message there is to say, look, nothing is static, right? You can't just, continue to work in your little isolated thoughts of what the business is doing right now. We need to be adaptable. 7.3 talks about inclusive. So this is an interesting one. And for some people, I know this is a bit of a challenge because the standard here talks about engaging your stakeholders. And while we know stakeholders include internal and external stakeholders, somewhat easier. External stakeholders, a bit more challenging, depending on who they are. Again, it depends on the context of your organization. So for us, we've got customers, we've got shareholders, we've got government, we've got regulators. And each of those stakeholder groups, we have to have a different conversation with. And when it comes to resilience, and it comes to resilience for our organization, and also resilience in the electricity generation industry, those conversations are supremely important and very, very different. So the message here is to say it's different. It can be difficult, but you have to include them, right? We have to bring them in. Inclusivity is a really important enabling behavior for resilience. Broad consultation and engagement activities, behaving in the vision of the organization's future. So again, coming back to what does your organization stand for, right? What's its mission? What's its vision? Right, and making sure we're including those elements in our conversation with our stakeholders, and being aware of the risks that the organisation face in terms of the relationship we have with each of those stakeholders as well. But you have to include them in the conversation. Okay, the next two is integrated, encourages cohesive solutions through diverse perspectives. So some of the messaging around here is, again, it's like what I described before, right? I'm not a risk management expert, but I will meet with the risk management guys because that's what they do, right? And, we have conversations. We talk about what it means to the organization. Can we share ideas? Can we collaborate on certain things? It's about trying to integrate and align the way we do things to reduce silos and exchange information, facilitate rapid response via interconnected systems and feedback loops. That tends to make me think about technology solutions, but it's also about business processes. So again, where I am, I've created, I'll call them a team that sits below the crisis management team, full of domain experts. It's not necessarily aligned to the organization structure. It's more aligned to our business offering and technology and other elements that come together in a connected way. So bring together decision makers, business unit, budgets, activities, agendas. Again, so trying to think more broadly than your own little patch of the forest. Reflective. Again, another enabling behavior that will help you improve your resilience. Learning from the past. And then modifying, your thinking, your practices, your procedures, your plans, your capability, to take that learning, that experience on board, using real-time data, horizon scanning for situational awareness, continually improve standards based on emerging evidence. So emerging evidence is also good. So do research. I try and spend some quality time, over my month just researching to see what's happening out there. I have to admit, Wasim, you might be happy to hear this. I use AI to help me do my research. I'm getting better at that. So I'm certainly seeing AI as a enabling tool to help us learn and understand and become more resilient. But reflective, being reflective of the world around us and our own experience is an important attribute here. Clause 7 continues with prepared, investing in capabilities to anticipate and respond to change. You might say, well, that's no different to incident or crisis management or our major incident management process within IT. Yeah, that's true, but maybe a little bit more broader than that. Let's have more people across the organization not so much look for things that could go wrong, but be conscious that if they see something that doesn't smell quite right, they should put their hand up, go to their leader, or go to a central point of contact and say, there's something going on here. I'm not exactly sure what it means. I'm not the expert, but I just want to tell somebody, right? So being prepared, right, is part of that way of thinking. Being aware of priorities, timescales, resource requirements, very much in the BC space. Finding different ways to achieve goals, during incidents by anticipating future conditions. That's a challenge, right? That's asking, in the heat of the moment, what if? We want to head down this path. That's the strategy we're going to adopt moving forward. But what if, right? What if something comes out of left field and blindsides us? So you may not know the answer, but what's important is to understand that that's an element of being prepared, right? Being able to ask those questions, to maybe kick off a team on the side and say, look, go away, come back later today with your thoughts on what would happen if we implemented this strategy in response to what's happening and it doesn't go to plan. 7.7 is about being robust. Design systems with redundancy and fail-safe measures, avoid over-reliance on single assets. Single point dependencies is a common thing we think of in business continuity and ITDR. But this is basically saying, well, it's one thing to identify them. It's another thing to make sure that you don't have this over-reliance on them. Build spare capacity to withstand extreme pressures or surges. And the use of the word surges, I think, is really valuable. The committee, the working group that did this, I think is really good because it gives you a different connotation, right? It helps you think about this, this aspect of robust from a different perspective. The last one, innovative. So encourages originality, imagination to meet evolving needs. And certainly, without overstepping some boundaries here, within AGL, we have I won't say recently, over the last, year or so, maybe a bit longer, we've established a new area within AGL, and all they do, right, is use their imagination to come up with new ways, new products and services for our customers, right? How to better manage their usage of electricity, right? How to, take on, battery storage and all the other technologies that are coming out, right? We're really leading that way. Because we do have this resilience mindset, right? We know that change is happening. The world is going through environmental concern and and low carbon footprint and all these things, and especially for us, leading the way in electricity generation and storage. It's really important for us to be imaginative in the way we drive our business forward, and thinking about the evolving needs of our stakeholders and our community, and rapidly adapt. That's sometimes a challenge too. Sometimes the idea is faster than your ability to implement change or the new technology that you require to support that change. But again, it's about thinking about those sort of things, and working out the best way that you can incorporate that into your business as usual mode of operations. The last point, fosters creativity to generate new ideas and solutions. Yeah, I think I've already covered that. So, yes.
Just one comment and a question. Now, when you mentioned in the robust about the single point of failure, which is from the ITDR perspective, very right. But at the same time, what I would share that when I go and then develop my business continuity plan and I design my business continuity team, as part of that exercise, I always identify single point of failure from personnel perspective as well, because you need to identify if there is a single point of failure, then you need to either cross-train another team member or you need to hire someone. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's also not just people, it's third-party suppliers. If you have a single point dependency on a third-party supplier and they suffer some sort of operational disruption, we have to understand what the implications of that is.
Yeah, so basically we need to see from holistic perspective, like any single point of failure so that we are resilient. The other thing, now these enabling behaviors now mean practically what you have seen is the most difficult one to adopt or implement.
The most difficult one. Integration, maybe. I think business units do find it really difficult to not work in silos. Everybody just stays to their straight and narrow. Everybody is pressured for time, pressured for budget. Everyone's got more work than they can consume. For some, it's like, drinking from the fire hydrant at times. And I think getting the organization to step out of those silos, break those silos, or overlap those silos, I think that's probably one of the most difficult, aspects. And it does take a change in culture and a change in mindset for people to be proactive and want to meet with other teams and share information. I think true integration requires shared governance structure, interoperable systems, that allows people, that opportunity to share. So I think integration is probably the one that I think is the most challenging one.
I agree. And Catherine also agreed. She mentioned in the chat.
Thanks, Catherine.
Integration. So I think we are in sync.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So they're the 7 enabling behaviours. And now I want to move on to clause 8. I'm just conscious of time. So clause 8 and clause 9 have a relationship. Think of clause 8 as the blueprint and the governance model for embedding resilience into the organization. It starts off in the center there with leadership and commitment. It's about, top management, their role, the governance structure. As I said before, we want them to, to say, do as I do, not do as I say. We want them to be actively involved. Policy formulation, we've talked about that. It's about aligning your resilience policy with your strategic direction, about who you are, the context, your mission, your vision, and so on. Strategy design. Actually, the content of strategy design introduces the notion of doing a gap analysis of your current state and your intended outcomes of the strategy, and to design action plans and embed resilience objectives into your other organizational policies and strategies. So what that's saying basically is that your resilience policy, right, is not just a standalone document, right? The philosophy of resilience should also find its way into, a lot of your other policies. Like if you've got a BC policy, there should be elements in that policy to talk about resilience. Risk management should have the same. So strategy design takes that into consideration. Strategy implementation, well, it's about implementing. It's about action plans based on the scope of what is to be implemented. Maybe you have to do it in small chunks over time. It's about, your engagement with your interested parties, and it's about, actually executing the strategy and how you're going to do that. And 5, evaluation. I'd say this is, well, it's all really important, but this is an important stage in the cycle here, because we want to be able to measure the effectiveness. We want to use KPIs, things like, if we're going to implement a project, are we meeting our deadlines? Are we doing this within budget? How many awareness sessions have we been running with our interested parties about what we're doing? Things like that. So that's the framework. And clause 9 is really the how-to guide, right? These are the actionable steps for executing the framework that we just saw in clause 8. It's about understanding the context, for understanding the way, your people think, understanding the culture, and implementing your tasks, your streams of work with, good knowledge and clarity about how it's going to be received and how it's going to be taken on board and worked with moving forward. Communication, that's all about the process of making everybody aware of your resilience policy and the strategy and the implementation. Like all things, right? Communication is fundamental to bringing everybody on this journey with you. The 4th step is around strategy design. So this is about alignment with your organization goals, establishing objectives, prioritizing them so you can implement them. And obviously the last bit there is about implementing. So it's about, implementing the plan, making sure you've got the right resources in place, making sure you've got clarity around the roles and the expertise needed, and getting them to do, what needs to be done, to execute the strategy that you've created, that you've designed. And then the very last part of the standard is clause 10. It actually sits in the middle of the clause 9 diagram. And this is about continual improvement, really a key fundamental philosophy of enhancing your resilience over time, right? That it talks about 2 key aspects. The first aspect is performance evaluation. It's about monitoring, measuring, reporting. And just to be really clear, this is not about measuring resilience. Some might argue you can't measure resilience, right? But this is more about measuring the changes you've implemented in your organization that collectively seeks to improve or enhance, the organization's resilience. And the other side of this under continual improvement is implementing the improvement itself, right? And again, you have to identify the gaps and adjust those strategies. So quite a lot of detail in the document. I've simply paraphrased that. Hopefully that made sense.
So now maybe a last question, and minding that the time is not much left. How do you see AI is complementing business resilience or continuity?
Well, I certainly used it in an example a few minutes ago about how I'm using it. I think emerging technologies, how do I frame this up? I think we can use technologies in a variety of ways to help us in the resilience space. We can use technologies to provide early detection of risks, real-time monitoring, decision support capabilities. We're looking at some technologies that put tentacles out into various online services that will make us aware of, physical devastations on the way, storms and cyclones and things like that. I think AI can definitely be used to identify vulnerabilities through, just, looking in the way we do things, right? Scanning our plans, our models, our strategies. Things like, digital twins can help us model up disaster scenarios before they occur and see what the implications of that is. I think there's lots of ways that we can use emerging technologies to help improve our resilience. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. The only thing I would say, like, especially now for the AI, again, I'll go back to that ISO 42000 very quickly. I'll wrap this answer. Like, if we decide to use those technologies, then we need to have established the governance structure, the risk management. We need to embed those risks into our risk management framework, because we should not trigger another risk by using those technologies for this, because those data should be properly trained, transparent, and ethical, and all that sort of controls. So yes, we should definitely, because I have seen a shift from don't use AI to use AI but responsibly. But then how we can use it responsibly, we need to have a proper framework and the governance around it.
Yeah, and some guardrails too. I mean, we've
Exactly.
embraced AI within AGL, and we certainly have some clear guardrails within which we can use those tools, and we're using it, to benefit the organisation, and we benefit the organisation in a variety of ways. And I think becoming more resilient is just one of the many ways that we can benefit from using this emerging technology.
Sure. And we have a hands up by Deb.
Yeah, cool. Which is good timing because we're up to Q&A at the moment.
Yes, Deb, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Can she unmute?
We can't hear you, Deb. Maybe you can type your question.
She's unmuted.
Oh yeah, she is.
Yeah, she is, but we can't hear her.
Can't hear you, Deb. Okay, is there anybody else with a we have no option to see mute or unmute.
I gave her the option. I gave her the option to unmute.
Yeah.
All right. In the meantime, I'll read out another question by Lorena. The question is, I'm still not seeing a clear difference between resilience and continuity. For business continuity 22301 to truly work, silos must be broken, top management must be engaged, a DRP should be in place, and stakeholder must be considered. Could you please explain the difference between resilience and business continuity? Very common question, right? So
yeah, very, very common question. I'm going to use the umbrella analogy here, right? I see resilience as an umbrella, and business continuity is kind of like one of the leaves that protects the organization. So we do need to think about what we will do if we are operationally disrupted. But there are so many other things that can cause us grief because something has changed, right? We could have a legislation change, right? Or a regulatory change. that requires us to do things differently. And if we don't do it in the right way or in the right time frame or with due consideration to the impacted stakeholders, we could find ourselves, in deep trouble. So BC has its specific purpose around disruption management, if I can really simplify it, but it's just one aspect of how we might need to, I guess, protect and look after the organization. Did that help?
No.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, maybe another difference is that I think with business continuity, we aim to have some definitive outcomes. We seek to understand what's our most critical parts of the organization and have strategies and capabilities and plans to follow and experienced people to follow those plans and recover the business. With resilience, it's different. I think resilience, is more of a journey. There's no definitive. You can't say we are now resilient. I think it's something that you just have to continue to improve and work on over time. So maybe that's a key differentiator between, BC as a management system and resilience as I won't call it an aspirational, well, maybe it is an aspirational goal, but maybe look at it from those two perspectives. Sean, do you think that was better?
Yeah. So.
Or you're just humoring me. You're just being kind. It isn't. Look, it's a tough question. I know. I've had lots of conversations with my buddies in risk at work over this. They seem to say, well, resilience is just a response to risk, right? And everything should come under risk. And some people say, well, no, everything should come under BC. And others say, no, everything should come under resilience. I kind of like the resilience umbrella analogy, but that's just the way I think about it.
Wasim and Saul, just before we get to the end, you can probably answer one more question after. Can we just cover off the last session, the last webinar? What would you like people to think about before they come to that?
Oh, yeah, Sean, good question. Okay, so over the journey, over the 6 presentations, we've talked about a variety of ISO standards in the business continuity space, this one being the first resilience one. We didn't really have enough time to explore in more detail the constructs or the philosophies of each of those standards. So we just thought we would run this extra session on the 18th of next month, just to give people the opportunity to ask, questions, to talk more deeply, talk philosophy, share experience about doing a BIA or doing strategy. So I would suggest that if you do have access to the standards, then just refresh yourself and write down some questions, right? Just that questions that you can bring that Wasim and I, and maybe we might identify a few other people out in industry who might be happy to join us and share their experience and be able to answer your questions. So it's really, there's no slides, right, for that session. It's purely Q&A or discussion. So bring your questions, bring your thoughts, bring your challenges.
Yeah, and everyone will receive an invite just like they did for this session if you're registered with the BCI. Otherwise, you can have a look on the BCI website for the 18th of September, 2 to 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time.
I just see this last one that Kim put up. Would you agree that change is a business disruption? It can be. It can be if it comes out of the blue or you didn't plan for it. I'd like to think that some types of change you can see coming over the horizon or closer than the horizon. You get notification, you get a period of time within which you need to do something. But yeah, there's no reason why you shouldn't consider change as a potential disruption. Good question, good observation. Is there any? No. Sorry, the question is there a way to access ISO standards without buying each one? Unfortunately, no. And just again, as I mentioned in the very first session, I am a volunteer in the ISO world. I do not get paid. I do not make commission on the sales of standards. The sale of standards goes to supporting the ISO as an organization, keeping it operational. And so those standards have value and those standards need to be purchased. But for some organisations, they typically do have access to them. They might have a corporate license to access standards. So you might want to check within your organisation. If your organisation is big enough, you might already have access to those standards in a restricted viewing way. So you should check that out.
Yeah, that is true. I just shared the link, where those standards are available just for the view, and starting few pages are, at least you can see the table of contents that is provided by ISO.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
that's a free option only.
And one last thing before we absolutely run out of time. So write these 6 letters down: ISO space OBP, Oscar Bravo Papa, online browsing platform. So it's a web portal into the ISO world. If you want a definition of a term, click the radio button and key in your word and you'll get the response back from all the standards. If you're looking for a standard, as Wasim just described, it'll lead you to the standards and you can open it up and at least see the first couple of pages or so to give you a sense of what the content might be. So the ISO OBP, online browsing platform. It's a great tool for you to step into the ISO world. All right. Well, I think we're close to time.
Yeah, and I think as Saul suggested, let's come up with very good questions. Let's have this discussion, and in our next webinar, you may not have to stick to those standards now. If you have questions that you think is not relevant to the standard, please bring it. Let's, we all are learning, and I think let's learn from each other in the next webinar.
And finally, a big thank you to all of those who are waking up, before dawn or awake, in the middle of the night somewhere around the world. We really do appreciate you tuning in and listening to our presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Saul and Wasim, for another insightful webinar. And we look forward to seeing you on the 18th of September. Thank you so much.
Thank you.